The Empire of Endless Flowers gets its name from a region of land within it, which is a particularly gardenful spot.
Well, and there seems to be some magic to it. Well, maybe not, but it's always it's like a naturally occurring garden. Mm-hmm. It was like that before anyone ever settled it. It was a naturally occurring garden. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that means it's just very flowerful, or if it's actually there's hedges, mazes,
organized.
Yeah.
I think the idea is that it was somewhat organized, so it's not clear why, but it is.
The lawns naturally grow like lawns, and
that would be awesome to live there. You never have to mow your lawn.
I know, living in the Empire of Endless Flowers is awesome. Glad you agree. Anyway.
I mean, even if you had to mow your lawn, you'd have a slave to do it for you.
No, we don't have slaves anymore.
Yeah.
So way back in the ancient myths of history, there was this large open area of land, and the garden was just part of it. There was a great river. I can't remember what its name was.
And it's very fertile, even around the garden.
Yeah.
Very fertile farmland.
To the north and to the west, I think it was, there were mountains. To the south is open ocean, and to the east is a narrow, long, shallow sea.
Yes. Thank you.
A little bit Mediterranean-esque, I think, in sort of general look. And then up near the northern end, just past those mountains, it sort of connects into the land that squiggles down. So, it's a big block of land with some well-defined natural borders. And humans lived there. Humans were the original inhabitants of the region. The humans of this land were a quarrelsome lot. Mm-hmm. They formed many small kingdoms and small nations that constantly vied with each other and made war with each other. And they became exceptionally good at making war, because they were practicing it all the time. Lots of little feudal kingdoms, lots of warlords. And also during this time, I think it was way back at the very beginning, the institution of slavery became...
It was pretty early in their history they became slavers.
Yeah.
Because they would raid the local things, and there was... Yeah, and there was also other human lands forming around them, but the central one, they would raid each other, and slavery became a common part of their culture.
Yeah, very, very early on. So throughout 90% of the empire's history, this is, pre-empire even, slavery became fairly common. So, into this mess, one particular queen arose. What was her name? I wrote it down. It was Queen Amarilla or Amaralla or something like that. Amaryllis? Anyway, she was a local ruler, much like many of the others. And in the course of the various squabbles and politics and whatnot, there was an assassination attempt on her. She got bit by this cobra that was a particularly nasty breed the assassin used. Its poison is invariably fatal. So anyway, this queen got bit and poisoned and was dying. And so word was put out by her court, we need a hero. We need a hero.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
To go and find a way to cure her of her poison that's of this invariably fatal snake bite. So one of the what are they called, those knights? Tim created this order of knights.
There were 9 of them?
Yeah.
And they're like epic heroes that appeared throughout history. But
Yeah.
what were they called? They each had a name.
Yeah. I can't remember which one it was, but one of them took up this cause. And he went out to find a legendary artifact that was capable of granting wishes. More powerful wishes than your standard wishes, even.
We can basically do anything.
Yeah.
But Wait, no, there's no but.
Yep, no, but it just does.
It just does, but you can only do it. No, that was actually just a rule.
As soon as you use it, it runs away or something.
As soon as
right?
you use it, it runs away and hides, and then
Yeah.
yeah. But,
So you basically only get one wish, and then it takes another epic quest to find it again.
well, and I think.
But the usual rules for wishes apply. The antagonistic rules for wishes apply.
Well, actually,
I don't
we
know if they do.
We actually don't know if they do, but they assumed that they did.
Yeah.
So they made this super complex wish.
Yeah, it was like this big legal document.
Because, and I feel like it would only do justice to mention this. This legendary artifact was in fact the Triforce.
I know, it was called the Triforce.
Because, I added the Ood to the setting. Robert added the Triforce to the
Yeah.
setting. It's our own personal setting, whatever, right? It has a Triforce.
Yeah.
So it's not like the full Triforce, but basically it has 3 parts. You bring them together and you get an Uber wish, and then they split apart again. That's what it does.
Yeah. So this heroic knight goes and finds it, and he reads the wish to it. He had the scroll.
Did that kill the knight?
Nope.
I don't remember.
Nope, he's fine.
That was one of the successful knightings.
Yep.
'Cause there was always a chance that when a knight went on a quest.
Now, the exact wording of this wish has been lost to history. The document is lost.
I'm sure it's in some legal archive somewhere.
But
I think she would have disposed of it.
in their attempt to make sure there were no loopholes in what was being wished for, there wound up being side effects. Weird loopholes, I guess. Basically, they figured, okay, we get a wish you can wish for anything. Why wish for just getting better from poison? Wish for immortality.
That seems like a problem.
So she got her immortality, and she also turned into a giant snake. And she became known as the Serpent Queen. She's a giant immortal snake. Became extremely powerful, both personally and politically, over time. And eventually all the squabbling sub-nations and kingdoms and stuff got united under her rule. And so the squabbling kingdoms became an empire. The Empire of Endless Flowers, so named after the region of the Garden region, which is where the capital is located. And also the capital is like the oldest major human city. It's like ancient and Byzantine and all that kind of stuff. For a long time it was basically just your big generic empire. And they did have slavery, but it was like Roman style.
Go out to the other areas, grab some people.
They kept trying to, but they had trouble. Their neighbors were all either human or really hard.
Yeah, well, but I think
Dwarves.
we didn't focus on it a lot, but
Yeah.
I think there were probably there's lots of fiefdoms and stuff along the edges
Yeah.
that became their slaves as they expanded.
Yeah.
But eventually they started hitting the dwarves, which are hard, and
Vikings.
The Vikings, the Vikings got enslaved quite a bit, but they also became freedom fighters.
Yeah.
And they did a lot of they were the good Vikings. That's what they were. They were like Vikings who went around, pillaged your town, but when they pillaged your town, they stole all your slaves and freed them. That's what they did.
Yeah.
So.
But the main interesting detail is that most of the slaves were also human.
Yeah.
To the north were the dwarves. The dwarves lived in the mountains. And the dwarves were
Well, to the east.
east?
Well, I guess northeast.
I thought,
Mostly east.
Mostly east.
so anyway, the dwarves are up there. And the dwarves are psycho-xenophobes that just hated outsiders.
Yeah, they were like the other main, scary empire. Not really empire, but
Yeah.
scary group.
So the Empire of Flowers wound up, even though they're really good at war, the dwarves were real tough to fight.
Well, it's hard to get through their mountains, right? You gotta
Yeah.
go through all their underground junk.
Yeah, and they didn't really want the mountains either. So
It's just they're a barrier to get through, and they're an extra hard barrier because they're full of insane dwarves.
yeah,
Well, they're not really insane, but
very very violent, very dangerous. So the Empire built not a great wall exactly, but a chain of fortifications in the foothills of the mountains. That formed their border with the Dwarven lands. And then the dwarves all caught plague and died.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, so that all is ultimately pointless.
yeah, well, there's a whole chain of abandoned fortresses along the Dwarven Mountains now.
It was about that time, I think, that pain slaving came into general use. Like,
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly where in history, but someone discovered that if you can magically connect yourself to another person in such a way that when you get hurt, they get hurt instead. Literally up to the point where if you get decapitated, they get decapitated instead. And then that breaks the link, of course. But, it was originally just, it started off in, sort of innocent ways maybe with like healing or whatever, but like they quickly discovered that this was a pretty awesome thing for them. And of course, it actually started out first with the nobility. Like the nobility would all get pain slaves, right, so they could live a long time. And they don't let you live forever because they don't heal your underlying condition. So, for example, if you have a heart condition and you have a heart attack, you don't die, your pain slave dies, but you still have a terrible heart. So, and you can only bind one pain slave a week. So as long as you're having less than one heart attack a week, you can stay alive, and you have lots of money to buy pain slaves. But like, once you start having more than one heart attack a week, you're gonna die. It's just a question of when. So that was where it first started out. But then they discovered its military application, which I think probably everyone knows. But where you get the guy on the front lines, and you train him up to be like the freakish barbarian, rip through everyone guy, and you chain him up to 50 pain slaves, and he just tears through the front lines, and he can just be completely fearless, chopping through the enemy, and you have to kill him 50 times to kill him. And worse, they just have pillaged the villages in front of you, so he's probably chained up to your captured friends and loved ones that you have to kill in order to kill this guy. And that was all their frontline fighters were like that. And that was when the Empire got really scary and started to really try to expand.
The Serpent Queen discovers around this time, she's sort of like, hey guys, I'm a immortal Serpent Queen of an empire and all that sort of stuff. But this is kind of going evil. This is going a little bit overboard, And it's about this time that she realized that over the hundreds of years that she'd been in power, the Byzantine power structures and all the rival factions within the empire and stuff had wound up basically leaving her behind. She was the immortal, unquestioned ruler, but she couldn't really get anything done because all her little viziers and servants and stuff were out actually doing stuff in her name, and she couldn't really rock the boat that much.
By Vectron?
By Vectron. So she found that, the Empire Flowers had gone off the rails, and even though she's the immortal Serpent Queen, she couldn't really get it back on the rails.
And there was a fortunate circumstance that helped her, right? We should probably back up before that.
Yeah.
And just mention that the Empire actually started seriously conquering lands and got through the dwarves.
They were going on a conquer the world binge.
They were doing the conquer of the world thing. They were conquering the mongrels, and that was the EEF war that actually ended just before the campaign started.
About 16 years ago, was it?
16 years before the campaign started. And they went down through most of the mongrel land, and they
went north and captured the bugbears.
Yes, they went north and captured the bugbears, and they actually found the bugbears made really good slaves. Unlike every other race they tried to enslave, the Oblin are just like, they're like, serve us or you'll die. And they'll be like, well, I don't see how this solves closing the chasm, and then they just die. And, the dwarves are just stubborn to the point of like, yeah, we'll never serve you, or we'd rather die than serve you. And
so they died.
Yeah, and like every race they tried to enslave was useless, but the bugbears, they were good.
Yeah, the dryads were pretty useless.
Yeah,
the
and there were a
forest
lot of them
elves were kind of hidden. You could use them as like house slaves, I guess.
Then there were those.
There's animal.
The Rama, I believe they were called.
Yeah. They were bound to animals or something.
Yeah.
That doesn't work very well at all.
Yeah, they just could not find. But the bugbears were good.
Yeah.
And presumably the mongrels were okay as well.
And I think actually the Serpent Queen thing happened. It didn't happen right at the very end of the war. It happened like right before the end. So we should probably discuss that before the end.
It was a turning point. So, in the course of the war, a lot of bad things happened. The elves took to killing pain slaves as their way of dealing with these immortal armies. They would sneak behind enemy lines and massacre the pain slaves, which were
All the slaves, actually.
Yeah. Well, they were all pain slaves. I mean,
they also did a few. You remember? This is I don't want to go deep into this, but they had that like seeing pool that would help them like see the future or whatever, and they did a few random raids where they would like go into each city and like smash certain houses and like blow up certain buildings for no apparent reason, then run away. And they also did some of that too.
Yeah.
So the elves, that was their main thing.
They were doing guerrilla warfare tactics, very nasty.
There was, I don't know if we want to go deep into this too, because this could be for a different story, but there was the big thing where they fought Valvania, which was the biggest, toughest, like it was like the big uber elf magical city, where the big uber elves were, and I don't want to go too deep into it because it could be a whole thing on its own, but essentially they won and totally destroyed that city.
And it sank into the Underdark.
But I don't want to go too much into that.
Yeah.
There was
And then they set their sights on Greybridge.
Yeah.
Now, the topography of the world, it's got this big crack in it. And the crack forms a barrier that basically cuts the world in half. And there used to be this canal before the crack extended. And then it cut the canal. And so the Oblin built a bridge for the canal over this chasm into the primordial chaos called Greybridge. And it's basically the link between the two halves of the world, essentially.
Yeah, you can go north around the chasm, but that's the Titan Wastes. You don't want to go there.
You can go south, but then you've got glass dragons and an endless sandstorm.
And it's really far for the EEF to go south. That's thousands of miles.
Yeah. They don't really have a naval power, so taking the ocean route around would be tricky. So really, Greybridge is the key link of travel between the two halves of the world. So if the Empire of Flowers takes it, then a whole nother half of the world becomes open to their conquest.
And they were just marching forward, unstopped at this point. Like they just nothing was standing before them. Like nothing could even really put up a fight, right?
Yeah. So all the free nations of the world rallied to the defense of Greybridge. This was going to be the cataclysmic final battle. Whoever won that battle was going to win the world, essentially. They came from all over. Even a squad of Vrock showed up. No one knew what the heck they were doing there.
Rock?
Vrock.
Oh, Vrock, right.
Yeah. Which I should mention in this setting are not demons, but they're just vulture people that pre-existed, and they were pretty much a relevant race.
Yeah.
And they just a squad of them appeared up.
And their language is literally
They're a bunch of scavenger losers who live down in the desert, squatting in ruins and stuff. And somehow they found out about this event, and they were like, "Yeah, this is pretty important. We'll send our best warriors." So this little squad.
You mean rock.
Exactly.
Dance party in the front line?
So they showed up. The Phoenixes came back to life just for this fight, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, because the Phoenixes had all died, and the Phoenixes, I forget why they died, but they all burned and died.
Plague.
Oh, the plague killed them, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And then that was when the whole city of Phoenixes was reborn for that thing. And the Phoenixes were the ones who had something, I forget just what it was, but something about their rebirth powers had some ability to sever to some degree the link.
I believe it was because people had communed with the tree, and they had influence over them. So they were able to use that influence to disrupt the link.
It was like more of a localized thing. Like it's when you're nearby, you can't use your pain slave links.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. So while all this is going on, there's a slave revolt in the Empire itself. The bugbears are revolting.
Are they ever?
Conan?
Yes. There was a bugbear named Conan. Conan the Bugbearian.
Yep.
Yep, I heard of him. He's famous.
Yeah. So anyway, he was the leader of this slave revolt. And as this slave revolt was going on, and the Empire is headed for this climactic battle, the Serpent Queen sees a golden opportunity at this turning point in history to shatter the status quo that has gripped the Empire and is preventing her from changing it from its horrible ways. She gets killed, struck down by Conan the Bugbearian in a climactic confrontation. You know, they set it all up. Well, she sets it all up. I don't think Conan ever realized it.
No.
Yeah.
Nobody did.
No.
Just
Only she
herself.
did.
Yeah. So she gets struck down. And now, even though she had no ability to influence the Empire herself, or well, she had ability, but not enough, suddenly the figurehead that everyone derives their power from has been struck down. And so shock and ruin starts rippling through the power structure of the Empire of Flowers. Just as their empire, or as their military,
Yeah, thanks.
their military hits Greybridge
I really like it.
and breaks upon the mighty armies of the Free Nations.
Yeah, and like the elves had sent ships there, everything. The whole world was defending that spot, and the Phoenixes were temporarily suppressing the Pain Slave Link, and there was a slave revolt back home.
And the Queen's been struck down. So yeah, everything falls apart. The Empire loses big. Their armies are crushed. Total shocking reversal. So their armies collapse and are in retreat. Meanwhile, the Queen isn't actually dead, even though I presume she was decapitated or something. That strikes me as Conan's style, like chop her head off.
Yep.
Because the thing about these Triforce wishes, the only way to undo one is to unravel the wording of the wish and find a loophole that you can exploit. And immortality was a pretty central theme of this wish. So, you know, you gotta find just the right way to kill her. And Conan didn't do it that way.
One thing I really actually liked about how world building went out is, Robert introduced the Triforce, which is totally from Zelda, but then we ran with it in our setting, and you have a setting where there's a Triforce, but there's also the immortal Serpent Queen using the Triforce to run her army of pain slaves.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Triforce weeps.
So she's not actually dead. She's now operating secretly. She wants to influence the Empire in new ways. And first item on the agenda is finish getting rid of this whole pain slave thing, because it's just horrible. She's the only immortal one, darn it. And she got her immortality the humane way.
Well, and that I remember that entering into it too. Is she's immortal, but there's a whole bunch of her people around who are almost immortal.
Yeah.
And that kind of tends to diminish your immortal power.
This one
Her
doesn't have
mystique.
as much raspberry sauce on
So anyway, she's still secretly alive, and there is a sect of loyalists that she's operating through, the serpent priests and serpent priestesses. And I believe I actually spent the points to make them a separate race. They're Yuan Tai, essentially. They're snake people. They have taken on the aspect of the serpent in honor of her and stuff like that. So, through her serpent priestesses, she introduces domestics, which are a replacement for slavery entirely. A humane and ethical replacement for slavery. The Empire can't just get rid of slavery. It's been part of the economy for its entire existence. If they got rid of slavery, the Empire would collapse. That's no good. Got to replace them with something. So they come up with a process to magically turn domesticated animals, give them human intelligence and humanoid form so they can fill the role of a slave. But they're animals. They're still animals.
Wasn't it particularly important that they came from the floating island as well?
No.
No, they didn't come
In
from
fact, it didn't come from
No.
that specifically.
They- I don't think
Because
they have anything to do with the floating
That's very
island.
different because the floating island animals. Well, we don't know that much about them, but they would be considered people.
Yeah.
But the whole point of domestics is that they're considered animals. They're
Yeah.
not people. So
Okay.
it's okay to have them as slaves. It's basically
Yeah.
the theory behind it.
So there's this big temple of the serpent priests called the Temple of Freedom. It's located at the start of the old Underground Railway, where pain slaves would go, and there was this long path they could follow with steps along the way that could break the pain slavery. So a lot of people used to get smuggled through there. Now it's official. Pain slaves go to the Temple of Freedom to go on the trip to get freed. And that's where domestics are made, so they set up an official trade. If you got pain slaves, there's an amnesty. Send them to Temple of Freedom, get domestics to replace them. And so...
But they also stop the linking of, like... The domestics aren't linked so that they die when you kill them.
You can't do that. They're animals. You can only pain slave another person. So pain slavery is illegal, essentially, within the Empire of Flowers now.
Yep.
And regular slavery is too. It's only supposed to be domestics.
You're not allowed to get new ones, and you're supposed to get rid of your old ones after a certain period of time.
Yeah. And it's a big and fractious nation still. Even though it's been an empire for a long time, there's still a lot
Well,
of...
it totally broke up from an empire now. It's like
Yeah.
it's back to warring kingdom.
My impression
Well, there's that too.
is that, the central authority has kind of broken down. And now all these individual kingdoms are independent again, but they were part of the empire for so long that it's sort of habitual that everyone still refers to it as the Empire of Endless Flowers.
Well, and outside the empire, of course, everyone calls it EEF, the EEF. And because they were the big evil, destroy the world empire, EEF to the people of the setting, EEF sounds like Nazi. Like has the exact same connotation. Like you'd be like, if someone was being like just awful, you'd be like, oh man, that guy's a total EEF or whatever, right? Like
Internet forum.
We ever came up with a Hitler equivalent, though?
Well, I don't know.
Would
I
it
guess
be the Queen?
It'd be the Serpent Queen because she was killed at the end of the war, right? So
Yep.
like
was she?
yeah, well, exactly.
Well,
Yeah,
nobody
she's
knows.
secretly alive somewhere. But yeah, I mean that EEF. It's just interesting because that comes up in the playing a lot because they're mostly in the lands that were conquered by the EEF or fought against the EEF, and so like EEF, yeah, EEF sounds to their ears just like Nazi.
Yeah.
It's a bad.
But of course, Cricket comes from the Empire of Flowers. And she is a proud... I still need to come up with a different word than citizen. She's not a citizen of the Empire of Flowers. She's a domestic of the Empire
Possession.
of Flowers. Yeah. Product of the Empire of Flowers. Anyway. And so she's quite proud of her homeland and ashamed of its history, but also quite insistent that a new leaf has been turned over and all that sort of stuff. So she's constantly having to sort of defend the Empire's honor, that sort of thing. It was quite fun.
And it's only been 16 years, so
Yeah.
everyone is super distrustful and often hateful towards the EEF because, I mean, easily within their lifetime they came and slaughtered their families, right? Like, everyone would know people who were killed by the EEF or fought in the EEF war, right? Like they're the enemy still for sure. And I mean, they lost the war and now they haven't fought again, but it's like it's easy for an empire to say, oh yeah, we're reformed, that's why we're not attacking you. It's not because you totally beat us.
And also, they lost the war, but they didn't lose any territory in the deal. So,
Yeah, because they basically beat them back to the mountains, which is already was the border.
Yeah.
I mean, no one wanted to cross the mountains. I mean, it's full of plague and the
the plague
remnants of the
trolls
dwarves
and
the mountains are messed up. So like, that's
You
a
don't wanna be
natural
in there.
border. So the EEF didn't lose any land. They just
So what you're saying is that you have 5 more years until the second.
well,
no, this was even less of a defeat than World War I for Germany. It was basically a draw.
Return to the status quo.
The reason that the Empire stopped fighting, well, they suffered a crushing defeat, sure, but they stopped fighting because of internal problems that basically put an end to this whole So anyway, that's the current state of the empire. It's fragmented, still running on a lot of inertia culturally that says it's an empire, even though it's not so much anymore. Maybe it will be someday.
Well, and it's interesting
Again.
to think, like, because when you think of an evil empire, I usually start thinking of like some kind of like, you know, stark, awful place. But it is situated in a naturally occurring garden. There's
Yeah.
nobility. Like, it's a nice place to live.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of culture there.
A lot of culture.
They're evil pain slavers, but they got good culture.
It's like all the old cities of Europe. There's all these, this theater has been here for 1,000 years. This palace is
It's like combining it with the old culture. It's combining like the power and prestige of America with the old culture of Europe. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's probably one of the most civilized places in the world. It's huge and it's been stable for a long time internally.
Lots of
It's got
laws.
roads, it's got cities and stuff.
Well, and I didn't really appreciate it until until Brian redid the map nicely. How huge the area that the EEF conquered
Oh, yeah.
and hold actually is. It's like a third of the whole continent.
Yeah.
It's big.
Maybe more.
They're the Bamerica. Or USSR.
Yeah. And sure, now they have, internal strife and stuff going on, but who doesn't? I think it's probably still a pretty nice place to live, generally speaking. The infight,
Especially if you live in the interior.
yeah, the infighting and
And,
stuff
like, the gardens.
is probably a lot how it was back in medieval Europe, where, if two kings hated each other, they'd get a bunch of knights together and then go have the knights kill each other. And it didn't really affect the peasants all that much. It didn't trash any cities or that sort of stuff. It was just a bunch of knights killed each other.
Yeah, it's small enough scale that it doesn't actually disrupt things. Like whole cities don't get burned. And
Yeah. And I sort of Cricket's former owners were killed in some kind of
Squabble.
a night raid on their household. All these people ran into the house and started killing everyone. And she doesn't really know what the details of that are, but that was probably the sort of thing that happens: is two noble houses are at each other's throats, and then one of them,
Yeah, I
kills
imagine it's a little more like feudal Japan.
Yeah.
But with a higher base level of what is it called? Standard living.
Yeah.
Yes.
And minus the shogun.
yeah,
Minus the shogun, because the shogun's dead.
Yeah.
well, it's-
yeah, like
Yeah.
I kind of imagine their culture, like, because most of, it's a fantasy world, so most of this culture is fairly medieval, but I sort of see them as like their sort of Renaissance culture, right? Like they're a step ahead.
yeah.
And I also imagine that during the war, I think that people probably got very used to pain slavery and didn't, they don't
Yeah.
even, it's just like, yeah, that's just how it is, and the war is going on, but we're all living our lives, and it's all nice, and, there's slaves, and maybe if I think about it, I might feel kind of bad, but I just don't.
Yeah.
And, I think they mostly just...
Like most empires.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
just lived happy
Yeah.
lives while
Yeah.
their armies conquered the world, and,
Yep.
didn't think about the horrible atrocities
Yeah.
they were living off.
Oh, we the baddies. Yeah.
I mean, the elven guerrilla warfare tactics did hit them at home to
Yeah.
some degree, but other than that, the war really didn't enter their territory all that much. So
This is a skull on my hat, right?
The album that they were causing, like, they wouldn't think, oh, we're getting attacked by elves. We must be doing something wrong. Because, like, those elves.
yeah, those
Yeah.
elven barbarians are just showing up and killing a bunch of us for no reason. They're horrible.
Yeah, for sure.
Bugbears are revolting.
Yeah.
How could they be so inconsiderate
It's
after
like-
all that we've given them?
Yeah.